Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Kernahan Webb. I'm a professor in the Law and Business Department of the Ted Rogers School of Management at Toronto Metropolitan University, and I'm also the director of the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility. And I would like to welcome all of you who are here for the first time, and welcome back those of you who are making return engagement to this particular CSR Institute session. And we are talking about a subject which basically I was just noticing what seemed to me to be an uptick in very serious and troubling incidents taking place involving Canadian mines, both here in Canada and elsewhere in terms of worker personnel. And immediately I thought of contacting Ross Gallinger in that regard. Ross is, as we'll talk about in a minute, a senior, retired now, senior mining executive with a lot of experience in a lot of different capacities with a lot of different mines and mining associations, and particularly with respect to health and safety and personnel issues. So contacted him, and to his credit, he immediately said, great idea, let's do it. So that's how that session came about. Let's move on to the next slide, please. I'd like to acknowledge that Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans and all newcomers, have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Next slide, please. All Toronto Metropolitan University CSR Institute sessions are animated by this definition of social responsibility, which comes from an ISO standard. ISO is not a intergovernmental body. It is a international entity that brings together governments, civil society, businesses, and others to develop consensus-based voluntary standards on a wide number of different topics, with the objective of facilitating interactions across borders. And in that regard, one standard that has been developed has been the ISO 26000 standard, which has more than 100 pages, but one of the consensus features of it was this definition of social responsibility, which incidentally was agreed to by, as I said, governments, private sector, and civil society organizations from the South and from the North. And as you can see here, responsibility of an organization for the impacts of its decisions and activities on society and the environment through transparent and ethical behavior, contributing to sustainable development, health, and welfare of society, taking into account the expectations of stakeholders being considerably broader category than shareholders, although shareholders would be an example of a stakeholder, is in compliance with applicable law, but also consistent with international norms of behavior. For example, ISO standards, international treaties, whether or not they have been ratified and implemented, those all fall into that category, and is integrated not only throughout the organization, but also practiced in its relationships with others, whether those others are contract personnel, or they are members of the community, or they are governments, or they are competitors, or they are civil society organizations, or they are human rights defenders and media, whatever they might be. It encompasses all of those. Next slide, please. The other animating concept for all CSR Institute events is the concept of sustainable governance, which starts from the proposition that with the problems that we have today, environmental, social, economic, that invariably are interjurisdictional and are complex and are fast evolving, oftentimes with a huge technological element to them. Really, the only way we can effectively address them is through a combination of, yes, government through laws, and intergovernmental, yes, through treaties, but also through the unique capacities of the private sector, both individual companies and industry associations, and also civil society. So both in individual communities and members and individuals of citizens and so on, but also non-governmental organizations and also mixed entities of one sort or another. They all have got roles to play. And in the safety area, this is very definitely the case. And they have a variety of different rule instruments, laws, yes, treaties, yes, but also standards and codes and guidelines and so on. Processes, yes. So again, rulemaking processes such as legislative processes, but also rulemaking processes for standards and codes and so on, but also processes for implementation. Again, both for government and for non-governmental approaches where there are processes for implementation, certification, auditing, and so on. And institutions, again, governmental institutions, most assuredly, whether those are courts and legislatures and regulatory agencies, but also the huge variety of different non-state institutions that make the rules, industry associations, standards bodies, and implement them. Again, certification bodies, auditors, and so on. And for adjudication, you can have third-party resolution processes of one sort or another, arbitration, and so on. So there's a huge variety of these things all operating at the same time. And sometimes there's a great deal of collaboration. Sometimes there's more of a rivalrous check and balance dynamic in place. And that's oftentimes a very good thing as well, because that rivalrous competitive dynamic can drive innovation and change and keep everybody's feet to the fire, as it should be. Next slide, please. Underlying the sustainable governance concept is this concept of institutions, instruments, processes, and actors, of which I've basically, in a very brief way, covered them all off. But suffice it to say, they're all involved, whether you're talking about government or you're talking about private sector or you're talking about civil society. The same combination of instruments, institutions, processes, and actors are at play, although the exact nature of each of them is different depending upon which one you're referring to. Next slide, please. Just to mention that we have these CSR Institute sessions all the time. We also welcome suggestions and ideas for upcoming sessions and speakers for those sessions. So please feel free to email me as per you see here. And if you'd like to see any of the previous sessions, all of those sessions are recorded and made accessible to everyone at no cost up on the TMU CSR Institute website. Next slide, please. So as I've kind of alluded to already, in light of recent domestic and international personnel fatalities involving Canadian firms, both with respect to operational issues and also more sort of personnel related issues at the international level that are not per se kind of operational, as we'll talk about in a second here. Now seems like an opportune time to review the sector's approach to worker safety. Ross is very well positioned to shed light on this topic, given his 35 years of experience in both managerial and operational roles, extensive responsibilities in this particular area, health, safety, environment, community portfolios, and also just executive roles in a number of different Canadian companies, as well as with industry associations, in particular, Executive Director of Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada. And Ross, can you confirm for me, were you the Executive Director at PDA when they worked with civil society, when you worked with civil society to develop ESTMA, the Extractive Sectors Transparency Initiative, as a non-state initiative that you then, proceeded to provide to government and say, hey, please proceed with this? Was that something that has your fingerprints on again? So that's a good example of private sector and civil society working together outside of government and actually being able to persuade government to do something. Sorry, did you want to say something on that?
No, you've characterized it very well. I think that was a very innovative approach to working with civil society, and basically the challenge was convincing government to adopt the the work that had been done. But not just PDAC, but the Mining Association of
Yep.
Canada was
Yep.
involved in it as well. So yeah,
Well, and on the
that
civil society side, some Publish What You Pay and some other very
that's right.
impressive civil society organizations stepped up to the plate. Yeah.
Yeah. And Revenue Watch, which now is, I think,
Yes, exactly.
uh,
Yeah.
they've changed their name now. They've
Yes.
expanded their governance approach. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So just to close off that thought, a good example of how it is, you should not be just thinking that government has got all of the marbles in terms of how these issues are addressed. Starts with the individual company and obviously the personnel within the company, and then it extends up to the associations and uh, standards bodies and civil society organizations that all have got very significant contributions to make. Next slide, please. So just in terms of the recent incidents, I've just put down some headlines here, but these are things that are easily accessible by everybody on the Zoom here today. So we're dealing with situations where Canadian mining companies operating in Mexico, 10 of them were kidnapped, abducted, and then were killed. I think there's only been confirmation on 7 of them being killed at this point, but every life is tragic, and so these are all tragic. And then we have 2 safety-related, very recent accidents that happen to both be in BC. I don't think there's any significance about BC, but you can get back to me on that, Ross. And then we have an example of a safety incident occurring in Burkina Faso, and also kidnapping and killing taking place in Burkina Faso. But there's also been other kidnappings, detainment of personnel, and killing, and obviously other safety fatalities occurring in Canadian firms around the world. And on top of that, let me be entirely clear. We're just zeroing in here on Canadian firms and Canadian firms personnel. But I want to be absolutely clear that we're using that really as a kind of a core sample, because the same issues are occurring with respect to non-Canadian companies, and the same issues are occurring with respect to non-workers. For example, community members, human rights defenders, and so on are also being kidnapped, killed, and so on, or just hurt one way or the other. So we're zeroing in on the Canadian context, but please do not take this in any way as an indication that there's something unique and only happening to Canadian firms, because I do not want to in any way give that impression, nor do I want to give the impression that there's something that's just occurring to the personnel. It's also happening to community members and to civil society organizations and so on. So with that out of the way, next slide, please. Just to mention that, because especially we do have people patching in from not just Canada, but around the world. And thank you for doing so. Typically at oddball times of day and the night, particularly impressive. Please feel free to email me with any question or comment you have, and I'll try to fold those in to the conversation as it goes on. So with that out of the way, thanks very much, Luke, for doing that. I'm going to turn things over to you, Ross. And again, my thanks for agreeing to shed some light on this concerning set of issues.
great. Thanks, Kernham. I'm really appreciate the opportunity here to talk about this. And I think, the question that you had posed to me when we kind of started along this path was, is there something happening, basically? What is there something that's actually occurring that's sort of why we're seeing this happening as well. And so let me try to address that a little bit, but give a bit of background too. So some of the incidents that you're seeing and some of the ones that Kernahan had put up here can be sort of divided into 2 kind of buckets, I would say, which is the occupational safety pieces. That's, the contractor incidents that are occupational safety aspects at site. And then you have the incidents that are occurring around security as well. And both of those have definitely have a safety element to them, but both those are dealt with in slightly different aspects, and I'll get into a bit of that. So let's talk a little bit about occupational health and safety. The the sector's done a lot over the past 30 years, basically, to improve health and safety at their operations. And safety is taken as a cultural aspect, a key value in many companies, and begins early on in the exploration process, as well as continue through construction and through operations. And the industry has done extremely well in terms of trying to improve safety, but unfortunately, we still continue to be fraught with fatalities. And one of the key aspects in the mining sector is that fatalities are generally related to the production part of it, either in the open pit, underground, was majority of ones that you will see occur. So you have to kind of take it like your workplace is changing every day. So rather than a chemical plant or some other factory where you go and your workspace is the same every day, you define the risks and manage those parts. Imagine coming to work every day and it's completely different. So that's kind of what you face in the mining sector. They're mining benches or they're mining underground. So it's completely different all the time. There's some semblance of continuity aspect of it, but your workplace is changing all the time. So that's one of the things that you have to deal with. In terms of how companies look at it, first of all, is assessing risk, which is all about consequences and the likelihood of that. I'll give you a bit of an example. And then in terms of how to reduce risk or how to manage hazards, we look at something called hierarchy of controls. So hierarchy controls start with the most effective to the least effective. You start with elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and then personal protective equipment. So let me give you a bit of example of that in use. So I live in Oakville, about 30 kilometers outside of Toronto. Let's say, okay, I'm going to go into Toronto. I'm going to drive into Toronto. Well, what could happen is I could get into an accident. I could be killed in that part. So let me go through what we can do in terms of protect that. So elimination. Okay, I'm not going to go to Toronto. I'll get on a video call like this. So if basically eliminated the hazard and the risk associated with that. That's the ultimate part of it. Okay, say I got to be there in person. Okay, so I'll take the train. Okay, well, now I've eliminated the hazard from car, but now I have to assess what the risk is associated with taking the train in. But that's the substitution part of it. Okay, I'm still going to drive in, look at engineering control. So cars today are engineered and designed to withstand impact. Newer cars have all kinds of collision avoidance and alarm systems and braking systems associated with it. So there's some engineering controls associated with it. Then we look at administrative controls. That's licensing. That's the training associated with it. It's the rules of the road and how we conduct ourselves driving. Those are administrative controls per se. And lastly, PPE. Pretty much that's your seat belts. You want to get more protective, you might wear a crash helmet. So in looking at that aspect, that's where we are. So where we run into problems is on the lower end of things. When we get into our risk controls around the administrative controls and personal protective equipment. A lot of the risks that we manage in the industry are unfortunately on that lower end of things. We are actually looking more at the administrative controls. So that's the procedures around doing things. And so what happens is that with procedures, you're opening yourself up for human error. And so we've all done that. If you think of driving, etc., we've made a mistake and gone through a stop sign, and lucked out because there was nobody there to do those things. So those sort of administrative controls that we have are always going to be prone to human error. They're also prone to the fact that certain circumstances occur that we didn't think about when we developed that procedure, and those situations occur, um, and put employees at risk in terms of either injury or fatality as well. So that's one of the things that the sector has tried to move more towards the higher end of that hierarchy control part of it, but a lot of times we're based on cost, speed, et cetera. We're dealing with the lower end of that hierarchy control piece of it as well. So
Ross,
yes, go ahead.
just before you go any further, just some points here. One is you raised the point about getting to work and the risk associated with that. My understanding is actually the issue of getting to and from mine sites actually is an area where there has been that is an area where there has been a lot of issues over time, people dying getting to and from the mine site, not necessarily getting from home to it, but you've got a giant truck going to and from a mine site to a spot where it's depositing things. So that's an issue, particularly in developing countries where the road system is not that good. So you're quite right to kind of highlight. I know you were kind of just saying it, this applies to all of us, but it's particularly an issue when you're talking about mine sites, which tend to be in remote areas where actually the roads are not all that good and so on. Point number one. Point number two, the construction phase of mining. Yes, it's true, every day a mine site is different, but the construction phase is a phase when everything is particularly in limbo because you're just actually creating that mine site. So that tends to also, I would suggest, be a site of unique set of risks just during the construction phase. Next point, and I say this since we're kind of talking about Toronto and how this is working in everyday life. Well, there was a very tragic incident involving fatalities of workers involving a company by the name of Metron. And what they were doing was they were working on the outside of buildings, and they did not have the proper equipment, and they did not have the proper upkeep of that equipment, and as a result, 4 workers were killed. But in looking into the situation as to why it was they were killed, yes, there was a lack of proper diligence at the highest levels of the company, and as a result, it led to a criminal negligence conviction against the company and also against an individual within the company. But it also led to regulatory prosecutions and convictions against individuals within those companies, including the CEOs of those companies. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because essentially, with respect to safety in these sorts of contexts where things are constantly changing, if you have a weak link anywhere in that safety protective approach, anywhere in there, that can result in a fatality. And in fact, in this particular case, it turns out that the scaffolding, the movable scaffolding that goes up and down the side of the building, was defective. So the equipment that was there and being used there, which also had to be certified, which also had to be regulated by government, that was also part of the problem. But that's not all, as they say in the late night TV shows. Also, 3 of the 4 workers were stoned. So, and which brings up, it's not just about equipment, it's about training, right? And it's about oversight of training. So, final other 2 points: technology is changing the way in which mining takes place. It's not just you at home not having to go to the work site. It's actually having less people down in the mine shaft than before. So that's another element. And then there's standards, certification standards, monitoring, auditing, in addition to government regulations. So just to kind of flesh out the safety scenario as you were describing it.
Certainly. Well, to give you to try to address or unpack some of that stuff, but you know, safety comes down to, 5 areas from my experience. It's around leadership. It's basically demonstrating that you're serious about safety and that that you don't compromise that piece of it. Um, it's around people, around the competencies of those people. It's around the selection of people in the roles. It's their, their training and development, including safety. It's about planning. That's all about developing, your risk assessment, your risk register. What's your strategy? How you're going to control, how you identify and control major and fatal risks, and of course, emergency preparedness as well. It's about the systems and processes, um, including legal compliance around change management, contractor management, incident reporting. And then lastly, it's all around performance because having all this, you still got to say, well, is this working? So, what are your targets and objectives? How are you actually assessing it as well? It's all about having all this stuff, I would say, but taking a step back and saying, is it really working? How can you show that? So again, it's five areas: leadership, people, planning, systems, processes, and performance. That's really the key elements around that part of it. And just from the mining sector part of it, and construction's a good one because you do see in the construction industry, and I'll take the mining sector aside, you do see a lot of incidents in construction, just as you have described in terms of because the the work site's constantly changing associated with that. And I can't comment for the constructions industries how they address safety per se, but when we look at statistics associated with the construction sector versus the mining sector, we see far worse than that sector the last time that I checked those stats. And it is an issue in terms of the mining sector as well. So it's getting the contracting companies basically to adopt your safety program, or or if they have one that's equivalent, that's fine. But it needs to be as equivalent as your own because as far as I'm concerned, and how it works a bit legally, is the contractor is an employee with a different work arrangement, essentially. And we had I would say a decade ago, used to blame contractors all the time, like they weren't our responsibility. And today you're seeing companies actually reporting their safety statistics that include contractors as well. So, I remember early days in Chile back in the early 90s is they used to give all the hazardous jobs to the contractors and the employees got all the non-hazardous jobs associated with it. So I think we've peeled ourselves out of those times today that a contractor and employees from a safety perspective is treated equally and expected uh, to follow the program and plan that we have in place.
It's interesting you should bring that up because it certainly is the case and also the subject of a lot of legal commentary as well, that contractors typically are not legally treated the same as personnel as employees. It's a principal agent relationship, whether you're talking about an employer-employee or a company and a contractor, but typically there's less control. There's less control associated with a contractor than there is associated with an employee. The relationships are typically shorter, and that sort of thing. And there is definitely long-standing has been this idea that you can kind of outsource the dirty stuff to people who are contractors, and that way, it looks good on the page that it wasn't one of your employees that got hurt or what have you. So that continues to be an issue. But something that you and I talked about was kind of like the starting point, as you mentioned here today for our discussion today, was has something happened recently that because we're dealing with anecdotes, right? Anecdotes of two deaths, safety deaths in BC, basically since January. And then we're talking about the Mexican hostage and killing incident. Also, we're talking 2026 now. And there are also earlier incidents of the security nature internationally and safety incidents domestically and internationally. But have you been able to identify, has anything changed in that external context, legal context, standards context, technology context, cultural context, that could explain this? Or really, is this, there's nothing there? These are just anecdotes and statistics don't back you up.
Um, I wish there was something you could determine that was a overarching link to it. I'll talk a little bit about the security after I sort of finish this, but
Sure.
in general, no. Um, the it even internally in terms of a company when we see when our statistics are starting to go the wrong way, um, and we get more even looking at near miss reporting, which is even a step further. People don't get injured if something happened, and and we do reporting and investigation on that. We seldom get a an there's an overarching issue that if we just fix this, it'll make a great improvement. Each incident has its own characteristics associated with it. Um, and you don't kind of get an overarching piece of it. So you could have two incidents of say a fall from heights and come up with differing conclusions between those two. The only comparison is somebody fell from a height, basically. But the root causes around that could be completely different around those. So we see fatalities increase and decrease um, over the years. When we see the trend going the wrong way, we really try to redouble our efforts associated with that, and try to deal with trying to stop that because look, a fatality at a mine site is not taken lightly. It has a dramatic impact on the workforce. It takes about a year for people at the site to recover from the emotional issues associated with that loss of that
I
teammate.
understand that. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
has it has an impact on production. And so we've the safety initiatives that we've generally put together, we can talk about a business case associated with it, the cost
Hmm.
of a lost time accident, the cost of a fatality. Because a fatality costs probably $1 million between the insurance costs, the family support that you have to go through, the stoppage in the production while you do the investigation,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. You can add that up very, very quickly. And
And it
the
could also have effects on investors who say, this doesn't seem to be a company that has got a good approach to safety in place. So I'm divesting or I'm not going to invest, as the case might be.
Yeah, you can have those stuff and can have a community impact as
Mm.
well in terms of fear. So, it has that emotional piece of it on the site that can have an impact on your productivity as well. So there is definitely a business
Yeah.
case towards good safety. So we talked about the occupational safety part of it. Let's talk about the security pieces of it.
Yes.
There is the incidents that you point out, Burkina Faso, there's some incidents in Mali,
Hmm.
Mexico.
Hmm.
Uh, there's some internal conflict going on in those countries. If we take Mali and Burkina Faso by example, Al Qaeda is in those countries. There's basically active terrorism going on. That means security and safety for personnel
Hmm.
transported to the mine, goods, etc., is going to have a security element to it, and the risk evaluation and the mitigation required to protect that takes an increasing element around that because
Oh,
because where everybody else acts and follows the laws, criminals do not. You know,
Right.
criminals are not contained by, any kinds of rules associated with that. And they work best on the element of surprise.
Sure.
So trying to get the intelligence, etc., that there's going to be an incident would, very much defeat the surprise element of the criminality component of it.
Well,
But
that's true, Ross, and that's absolutely something that we should dig in on and not discount. But it's also worth pointing out that mining activity oftentimes is not universally welcomed in a particular community. So this is quite apart from terrorism or rampant criminality. If you have a particular industrial operation that is not universally welcomed into that community. This is another kind of contextual factor that can lead to this sort of reprisal or whatever you want to call it. So not taking away from what it is you're saying, but this is kind of different from a lot of other sorts of industrial activity that takes place. Is this one here is oftentimes highly contested and not universally accepted. And indeed, even from one community to the next community over, there could be hostility because the next community over doesn't feel like they're getting the same shot in terms of benefits that flow from that. So there can be all kinds of non-terrorist, criminality explanations for this. But the other thing to talk about here is that companies can choose that every company's got a different risk appetite. There are some Canadian mining companies that say, we will not operate. We will not operate in any country that has these sorts of risk characteristics. And there's others that will say, we will operate. And in fact, they go into those ones because they're less expensive upfront only. They're less expensive to go into those countries. But as I said, only upfront are they. Then there's all the things you have to do in order to carry out that mining activity because you're going into an area that is in a conflict or it's fragile, whatever it might be. So anyway, just wanted to add that in to your discussion.
yeah, so the opposite of your first case in terms of I agree with you. If you don't have a solid social license, that can compound the criminality component of it as well. But my experience having a good social license is actually the community would actually come to us and say, there's some shady looking characters that are in town here, just to let you know. And so then our security would then basically be on greater alert associated with that. And really in terms of security, it's all about trying to be a hard target for them, making it very difficult in terms of anticipating what they're going to do and then how do you best disrupt that part of it. So that's part. And sorry, I've lost my train of thought in terms of your second point.
Well, my second point was basically that every company has got the choice
Yeah.
as to whether or not they go into any particular area. And there's some Canadian mining companies who make it very explicit. We will not go. We will not go there because corruption is too high, or because this is a fragile state, or because there's a war going on, or there could be a war going on, or whatever it might be. And that's part of their risk investigation, risk identification, and risk appetite, and they just cut it off. So, but others say, well, that's the only ones we can afford is to going into these areas where, we're going into a bad neighborhood, quote unquote, we would not have the opportunity to get this particular, extractive opportunity if it were in Canada, where we'd have to pay an arm and a leg in order to get there in the first place. But it's also worth pointing out, Ross, and again, I know you know this better than I do, that there have been situations of hostage takings and killings in Canada. There was the giant mine, was a bombing in Canada and a killing, and that was worker animosity over unionization techniques. So we cannot isolate this and say this is just a situation in developing countries.
Yeah, I mean the other thing to consider as well, Mexico 20 years ago wasn't what it's like today.
Mhm.
Um, so if you started an operation 20 years ago and it has a 30-year mine life, you're now you're surrounded in a conflict zone, basically. And that's the situation in excuse me, in Burkina Faso and Mali when I was with IM Gold. Those were extremely safe jurisdictions to be in at that point in time. Al Qaeda was in the north part of Mali, but not down where the mining operations are today.
But Ross, this is again where we come back to what are the particular standards and processes that the company has in place, or that mining companies are expected to follow, or laws. Because surely what you should be doing constantly is reviewing and revisiting. Has the risk profile of this country, of this particular community, has it changed? And if it has, what are we doing to adjust to that changed circumstance?
Yeah, yeah. And that's pretty much what those companies have done associated with that. But exiting out, unfortunately, once you've got the investment there, you can't just decide, oh, I've got another project somewhere
Well,
else, so I'll go there.
companies do. Companies do that.
Oh yeah, no, no, they do, but for a mid-tier company, that's not a great option for them from a financial point of view.
No,
So,
it's definitely
but
the last one you're going to
but
choose for
but
sure.
definitely there could be a time in certain countries when you need to make that decision, and companies have sold operations
At
partially
a
as a
loss.
consequence of that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway, that does happen, but again, just to your point, you can pick a jurisdiction and one day it becomes a conflict zone as well. It's That's the situation I think that I see in the world as it becomes more and more complicated. Um, and there's a lot more kind of criminality aspects of things happening in countries for other reasons as well that complicate the ability to do business on a legal basis.
Well, that's true. And I guess the question comes recognizing that the world is a more dangerous place than it used to be. And here are the specific spark points on why it's become more dangerous. So therefore, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm kind of probing this particular angle on it is because does this mean that we should be revisiting the codes that individual companies have in place and processes and training? Does this mean that we should be revisiting the standards, industry association standards, or just standards which are sort of mixed industry and non-industry personnel all around at the table? And should we be revisiting the laws that we have in place? Perhaps other things as well. Should we be revisiting the technological aspects as well? I don't know, but I'm just saying, are these situations where we say, yeah, well, the world's got more dangerous. I guess that's the way it goes. Or are we saying, is there something we can do?
And that is the question that should be asked internally associated with it too. I think that in more difficult jurisdictions, if you're not really working in terms of improving how you're doing security, and that's both security personnel as well as assets, then you can get into a problem. That old risks line of, my dog doesn't bite.
Mm,
Um, we've never had
bite
this
us until the
problem
time it
before.
does. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And a dog that doesn't bite is one that hasn't bitten yet. There's still
yeah,
that
yeah.
potential associated with it. So we, I do come across people in the industry at times that their risk assessment is, well, that'll never happen. It's never happened to me, sort of thing.
Hmm.
But it's still there, that the risk is there. It's happened somewhere else. So Why do you think you're immune to that here? So,
Well,
that's
the other thing,
that's
Ross,
a bit of that's a bit of a false sense of comfort in some
yes.
senses. You always need to, you need to plan for the worst and hope for the best in some
Yep.
senses.
I was just going to say as well, what you do see, and I've literally seen this myself, is companies that have had a problem, but they don't have a problem now. And so as a result of not having a problem now, they kind of start to take the rivets out of the plane, right? This one doesn't seem to have any bearing one way or the other. We can take this one out. Nothing happens. Oh, so let's take out another rivet. Oh, let's take out another rivet until finally, something does happen. And that is a very common reaction. You're always looking for, cost centers and where can we reduce costs? There hasn't been any problem here, so let's see if we can reduce the cost there. And incidentally, that's not just something that companies do, that's also something that regulators do. We don't need that many inspectors in this area. We haven't had any problem right up until they do. Then, obviously, that minister has to go. Obviously, that's a horrible minister responsible for that portfolio. So I want to be an equal opportunity sort of describer of the situation here. We're all guilty of getting complacent and thinking we can take our eyes off the ball because there doesn't seem to be anything happening today. But so what do we do? What do we do to prevent that sort of complacency or worse from setting in?
It's constantly being risk aware associated with it. I mean, we see that in safety incidents. People just don't believe that they'll get injured in many senses, and we have to constantly remind people that the hazards that are at site, can kill you. And realize that part of it and not go, no, that'll never happen to me, sort of thing. Same issue in terms of security is, thinking about the worst case scenario associated with that, and how are you going to protect yourself around that part and be diligent on that, because as soon as you let your guard down, that's an opportunity for basically the criminal element. They're waiting for you to become a target and not that hard target as well. So yeah, it's keeping it's keeping your safety top of mind at all times. And I think we need to do that, personally. I was on a vacation and walking streets in Argentina, and if you weren't careful, you basically sprain your ankle and on some of the sidewalks. So it's, both my wife and I were being more duly diligent in terms of where we were stepping associated with that than just assuming, well, I walk around in Toronto and it's not an issue, so it shouldn't be an issue here, sort of thing. So, that's the kind of thing that you have to keep in mind as you're going through it, not become that complacent, as you say.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering whether or not the techniques to guard against complacency need to be revisited. And I'm going to give an example that and I know very well, and others probably do as well. And that is the mining industry has made considerable efforts to make safety a kind of automatic, understood, everybody has to do it, it's trained and so on. And so, for example, you can't go into a meeting with mining personnel without them immediately saying, here's where all the exits are, right? Like it's something that's ingrained into them. They have to say that at the beginning of all meetings, no matter where those meetings are, they have to say that. And when they step out of their vehicles, they automatically go around and put blocks behind and these are just automatic things that all mining companies do. And that's great. But what I'm suggesting is maybe there needs to be things such as you're leaving the mine site now. What are the possibilities that you are going to potentially interact with someone who has evil intentions in relation to you, your family, and the company that you operate? Here are the 6 things. Watch, maybe it's down to a nice little, a mnemonic device of ABC. Just do these things every time. But is there something like that? I'm talking about a new approach, a revised approach to guard against complacency, to deal with the new types of issues that we're facing now, be those security issues or safety issues. Another thing that's happened as a background issue is social media. Now everybody has a phone. That could be very good. That could mean giving people a heads up of an incident or a possible situation, and that's all positive. And that's something that can be incorporated into the risk preparation and so on. But it's also a potential hazard because people can be preoccupied and looking at their phone or what have you instead of concentrating on what it is they're doing. So that's just an example of something that's changed, arguably, since the situation, say, 10, 15 years ago, and what has changed in relation to safety and personnel protection.
Okay. So, one thing that I've observed, and what I would argue is that again comes back to what I said before, is that people don't have this realization that they can get hurt. We they get kind of muddled in the process. So, all these checks and balances on safety and procedures and the safety talks at the beginning, etc. But what does that really? So what, so why are we doing this, sort of thing, right? And it comes back to what is our goal on all this? And I would say that that sometimes gets mixed up. I once reviewed a mine site that I asked the management team, basically, what are we trying to accomplish here? And they said the system, and I go, no, we don't want anybody hurt. So,
On.
so this, the purpose of the system got totally lost as a consequence of that. And
Yeah,
what's our objective?
yeah.
If you get to go home every day safe and sound, then we've actually accomplished what we are. So it's taken that to heart. I also did, about 2 years ago, I basically did a cultural safety review, and it was very interesting because we talked to employees out in the work site and asked them, okay, what are the risks that they face, and how do they manage those risks? And they would tell me all the right things, and then we'd let them go and watch them, and they would not do any of that. So then you come back, okay, like
What are we doing
you just
wrong?
told me
Yeah,
how to do this properly, and you're
yeah,
not, and why, right? And it
yeah.
comes down to, well, this is faster, but not the consciousness of, but do you realize if you don't do it this way, I'm going to get hurt? Well, I've done it this way and I haven't got hurt, so
Right.
it's that, again, comes back to that sort of personal risk tolerance associated with it, but not understanding that you're actually saying I could get hurt, but I'm going to do this anyways. It's like, I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to get hurt, sort of thing.
Yeah,
So, there's a lot of things in terms of observing employees and trying to figure that piece out of it.
yeah.
But again, fundamentally, what I've gleaned from what we've been doing is we've been doing a lot of great stuff, but the employee is now confused as to what the ultimate goal is. What are we trying to do by this stuff? And so we get wrapped up in the system and not say, well, the system's supposed to get us to zero harm or whatever.
Well, just to give you an example, then I think you're absolutely right that people lose track. And believe me, as a professor, I ask people, why are you taking this course? And it's just to get marks. That's all they're concerned about is getting. They're not concerned about learning at all, right? Which is very much like a company saying, "Why am I getting certified? Because everybody else is getting certified." It's, well, yeah, but why?
Yeah,
Why? To
yeah, that's
reduce,
right.
So
Exactly.
this problem exists at all levels. But a couple points. One is that we also have political risk insurance. When we talk about security at the international level, we have political risk insurance, which is an indication that there are calculations going on about is this or is this not a safe place, and here's why it is or is not. Here's why your premium is going to go up or down. So that's another aspect. We also got a question, a very good question from our audience here. I'm just going to kind of read it out to you so you get it exactly in their language here. I'd like to hear about changes Ross has seen in his time in the relationship between the head of mine site security and the head of community relations. Excellent question.
Yeah. Look, to me, when security and health, safety, environment, community work well together, um, it's fantastic. Um, when security acts like police, it creates problems basically around that part of it. So I've seen it really good in terms of, again, security almost being part of the HSEC team in many senses. Um, uh, and have some other in terms of the asset protection part of it. But if security gets offside, you can get offside with community as well. When they act like police, it becomes a, very can become very much a conflict as well. So I hope
Well,
I've answered the question. Again, when security is integrated into both community as well as safety, it functions phenomenally.
well, I think again, I'm as you are, I'm looking for constructive approaches so that these things are happening less often. And so what I'm thinking is asset security, safety, just security of personnel, three issues there, and community relations. Those should be, there should be absolute horizontal connections between those four. Those should not be viewed as that's a different person over there. We don't talk to that person over there. That's a whole different thing. No, 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 no. Like those should be integrated at the level of standards and protocols and so on. They should be integrated at the decision-making level. And frankly, what about having automatically any mining personnel that have to start off every time they talk to us, someone else have to say something like, I am engaging in this activity because my safety is at risk, as is everyone around me if I don't take care of this safety risk. Just have that as like a starting statement. I know it becomes like every other, prayer that is said after a little while. I'm not listening to what it is I'm saying, but start with something like that, which is an integrated statement. It starts off with, this could hurt me individually. This could hurt, if I don't handle this right, this could hurt people around me, whether they are my colleagues or they are members of the community or whatever. So everything that I am doing and the mining company that I'm working for wants this to be utmost in mind before anything else. I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out here as to, is it time for a revisiting and refreshing and maybe a
No,
recalibration?
no, the DuPont Bradley curve on safety maturity, basically, that's the ultimate goal you'll get to, but you have to go through this whole compliance, systems, individual accountability,
Yeah.
team accountability part of it.
Yeah.
And you need to run through those first two very quickly. You can't DuPont basically says you can't just jump to the team accountability part of it. You have to
Yeah.
go through the sort of compliance part and then systems
Yeah.
piece of it, et cetera, around that. But what you're describing is basically the ultimate maturity piece of it of any safety system.
But in the absence of there being that maturity, I'm thinking that you and I, in the next 10 minutes, which we're not going to do, we could actually come up with a single statement that brings all of this together. It's a powerful single statement that if that single statement was kind of like Miranda rights in the United States that have to be read out before the police can do anything, right? That would be something. It's just like an awareness point. It's yes, one that many will just, as with the Miranda rights, it will become just part of the scenery for a lot of people. But for other people, that becomes a point that it can say, wait a minute, are you saying this? Because maybe we should not be doing this. Just offers that opportunity for kind of a recalibration on the spot. Anyway, as I knew would happen, as you and I talked about, we have more to talk about than we can possibly fit into the time that we have. But I think we've done at least a preliminary job of covering this off. Happy to talk to you or other people about, is there something more that can be done? Because I'm sensing there is, that it's time for a kind of a revisiting and a refreshing of, and as you say, linking together assets, security, occupational health and safety, community relations. Let's talk about, take each of those four stovepipes and what happens, revisiting them. What can we do about bringing those together, recognizing that some things will have to stay in the stovepipes. Anyway, as usual, as always, thanks again for coming on today, Ross. I'm sure we'll be doing this again in one form or another, but excellent coverage in a short period of time today. And thank you to all who patched in for today and for your questions and comments as well. Much appreciated. See you at the next session. All the best.
Thank you.